Hi guys, this is Haley's one-on-one tutorials, and today I'm going to be showing you how to rig Bender's arm. A little recap from the session that we would have had in class. So as you can see here, I've made a base. I only got a single arm with some fingers. What I'll do is I'll set out two tutorials for you guys. One will show the basic rigging of how you would just go about connecting the arm itself and how to make that move. And then I'll show you an approach what you would have in order to adjust it so the hand is then connected and you're able to pose the joints as well. This is something extra that you guys can pursue or watch rather. You don't necessarily have to do it, but the important thing is making sure that you get this first tutorial down by rigging the arm. So let's get started. First we want to make sure we're under the animation tab and we can see skeleton to select our joint. But before we do that, we want to make sure our mesh is nice and clean. So I want to highlight everything. We want to go edit, delete by type, history. Now the mesh is already clean, and the reason why I can see this is with everything highlighted, we haven't got any inputs here. If I say go to the polygons tab, under mesh tools, insert another edge loop, maybe if I want to curve it off a bit more. You can now see that a poly split ring input has been added, and this is referenced in the history. So again, to get rid of that, do what we did before, highlight everything. As you can see, it's still displayed. Edit, delete by type, history. Before you start rigging, make sure that your geometry is nice and clean, ready for the next stage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate something you shouldn't do in terms of when you're creating your joints. So just switch to the animation tab, and then the proper way to execute how to rig or create the joints for the arm. So I'm going to select the joint tool here. So a common mistake for people when they start using 3D software is they get very used to the perspective viewport and naturally become accustomed to creating everything within this viewport. This isn't particularly a habit you want to get into, especially for when it comes to certain parts of the production pipeline as rigging, because the moment I start clicking into this from this angle, it looks absolutely fine. Once we've hit enter and then we tumble around, it's all the way over here. So you think, okay, that's not too bad, might be offset by where it is on the board, which in that case, or on the grid, which is quite far away. You actually notice by the time you align it up to where you want to go, your joints aren't in proportion at all. So I'm going to delete that. And the appropriate viewport to use for when rigging arms is the top one. So what you want to do is go skeleton, joint tool, just need 3 joints, one here, one here, and one here, and just hit enter. If your joints are too big, you can go under display, animation, joint size. At the moment, to my grid, the joints are fine, but I can increase them or decrease them. But for now, I'll keep it at 1 and just close it. So now as you can see that these joints are set to the bottom of the grid, so we just want to pull them up, switch to the front viewport, and I just want to align them into the center line. There we go. So the next stage that I want to do is I want to create a controller. So let's go back to the top viewport, just using spacebar to switch, and under the curves tab I want to select the NURBS circle. Just select that, and I'm going to create this controller onto first the elbow joint and then a secondary one for the shoulder joint. So I'm going to click and drag as you do to create normal polygon primitives, nothing new. like the joints when we first made them, they're at the bottom of the grid. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the y-axis, which was our green arrow, make sure it's highlighted. If you use the middle mouse button, you can now drag it up that way. Just a little extra tip for you guys. So just dragging it up and down, because it will restrict it to the set axis. If I do that with the middle one and then use the middle mouse button, you can move it anywhere. X-axis restricts it to that. Let's go back to the Y. And what I want to do now is basically snap the center of the NURB circle into the center of the joint. So one way we can do this is by going up to here and selecting the snap to points tool. Just going to select that, switch to the perspective viewport, and all I'm going to do is basically just drag it around. Because it was quite close, it snapped quite easily, but just to demonstrate the tool a little bit further, as you can see, it will naturally snap to any point that you've created on your geometry. So again, just going to guide it into the center. It looks pretty good. So now what I want to do is rotate it within the z-axis. Blue line. As you can see, it's affecting it here, so I'm just going to type in 90, so it's nice and precise. One thing you can always do is you can go into Control Vertex on component mode for this, and just like a polygon, you can always edit the shape too. So say if you wanted to bunch these in a little bit. Might maybe want to move that up. Again, we've still got this selected, so just deselect, so you can move it a little bit freer. Maybe if you wanted to have a distinct way of telling the top from the bottom, could maybe curve them like so. Completely up to you the way how you want the controller. I reckon I will have it like this. That looked good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to F8, then F8 once more. We're going to select F8 rather. I'm just going to hit Control D, and then just drag it along, and this will act as our controller for our shoulder as well. So again, want to turn on this tool, snap to points, and just drag it around about into the center of the joint, which looks like it's done that pretty quickly. And I'm just going to increase the overall size of this one, make it a little bit slimmer as well. And maybe, just maybe, gonna rotate that a little bit. Just switch that off. Have it like that. So it looks a little bit like a shoulder blade. If it was like 80s and you had like pointed shoulder vests and stuff like that. So I'm gonna rename this as shoulder control. Elbow control. Good habit to get into using underscores to separate your keywords. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to highlight these two. Doesn't matter if this is highlighted. And like with the mesh before, I'm just going to delete the history, like so. And next, I want to reset these values so I can freeze the transformations. So if we ever wanted to, say, go back to our bind pose, or get back to this, we have to remember all these values, and to be honest, it's not going to make sense. So what we want to do to make our lives naturally easier is we want to highlight both of them and reset these values to 0 by going Modify, Freeze Transformations, and as you can see, both controllers are now reset to 0. So it's going to make life a lot easier for us. One thing to note real quick is, if you notice, even though that the actual curve itself is now off-centered from the joint, the actual pivot is still located in the center. And this is the important part, making sure your pivot is within the center of the joint. So now we continue to the next stage. which is constraining. A little bit of a pause there because I had to wait for the video to sit over to 10 minutes rather than me get cut off halfway through a word. So we're going to use 2 constraints within this video, or sorry, 1 constraint, 2 different types of parents. There's 2 different types of parents in all. You have your normal parent, which is under edit and just listed as parent, as you can see here. So our primary one, or our standard one, just refer to it standard, and our constraints, which as you can see there is also a parent. So whenever it comes to parenting, normally you have within real life a parent and a child, and the same applies to here. In this case, what we're going to do first is use our constrained parent, so I will talk about how that one works first, and then when we use our standard parent, I'll then tell you about how that one works too, rather than get muddled up. So because this is a constrained parent, because what we're going to do is use this controller to link to this bone, or this joint. If it's easier for you, you can also consider them bones, but just remember the primary name is joint. Because we want to link the 2 together, we basically want to make sure that when we rotate this, that this also rotates. So in a way we are constraining the joint to move and mimic the movement of this. So if you have a parent that needs to cross the road, and then with their child, they'll naturally hold their child's hand and escort them across the road because they are constraining them to walk in that direction of the parent, rather than just letting them run wild and stare at the grass or, you know, poke a stick in something. You want the child to follow the parent, but the parent is specifically asking them to follow a certain route. So what we're going to do is first highlight this constraint, oh sorry, this curve, getting words muddled up now. Select this curve, our elbow control, hold shift and select the joint, and this is our elbow joint, which in this case is joint 2. Just going to go constrain, I'm going to select parent, and now as you can see when we grab the controller, the joint has now changed to a purple colour and is now being influenced. If we select this controller, as you can see it's only highlighting the controller, there is no influence to any of the joints. So now when we move our joint around, when we move our controller around, the joint follows. Make sure when you are using controllers, you use the controller. If your joint isn't purple, you're not using the controller, okay? Or maybe you are using the controller and it's not parented properly, but either way, a successful controller goes green, joint goes purple, and it will move along to where you want it to go. So I'm going to do the same thing here, but what I'll do to demonstrate is I'll do it the other way around so you can see the results. So let's say it's going to be the child's job to escort the parent across the road. So we'll parent our constraint that way. And when we move this joint, the controller follows along to that. But the moment we then say, oh hang on, you know, go back into the appropriate roles, we want the parent to control the child and help them across the road, child's not going to listen. Doesn't matter, don't do it. Doesn't want to do it. So what we're going to do is just clock our little description bar down here, just looking at the commands, and basically when you get to undo constrain parent, just in case you followed along every single step, just undo it once more, that's gone, no more parent. So again we want to select the controller, then the joint, because the controller is going to constrain the joint into a certain direction. And we hit parent. Now as you can see, the controller moves along, but we have another hitch. We've made this controller, we have this controller, but this one doesn't work properly. And the reason why is because from where we have a constraint with this controller onto this joint is basically cancelling out the full movement of these 2 joints through this controller. So what we need to do is we need to tell this controller, if I can use my words properly, to follow around this controller. So imagine you have a child in a shopping centre, or they're say doing the food shopping with their mother, and the child goes, I want to get out the trolley. Child's out the trolley, wandering around. Now the child doesn't want to get lost because otherwise the child won't be able to find their way back around, so naturally instincts kick in, you follow the parent, which is basically what we want here. So we want to highlight the child, which in this case is our elbow controller, and select the parent, which is our shoulder controller. Edit, select parent, and now when this is highlighted, it's normal, what we're used to. But now if we select this, both is highlighted, all the constraints are highlighted, and when we rotate, all this happens, which is good. This is exactly what we want. Again, making sure we're using the controller to rotate with. We don't select the joint because otherwise that ruins the whole point of making the controller in the first place. Just put that back to 0 and done. Now, another thing I'm going to add in to help you guys kind of understand the way how joints work. Because a common mistake that I've seen through students is they'll go, oh okay, I want to move the arm up, and go like that, which looks okay for now. But if I say take it to the next step and bind the skin, if you move it up, basically all you're going to be doing is dislocating the joint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bind the skin real quick so we can see a quick demonstration. Select the root joint, which is the first joint that was made. You'll always know which one's the root joint, which will be our primary one, and it's what all the other roots or what all the other joints branch off of, and it has the square base. First one of those, select the root, and then select the skin that we want to bind. Skin, if you're using 2014, you'll have an option that says bind, and then you'll be able to select smooth bind. Excuse me. And obviously 2015 it's now listed like this because it wants to be confusing, but ultimately for the better. So we just hit smooth bind. Now if I press 5 here and I grab my controller and I move this around and everything moves nicely, but as you can see this is attached, and that is because we've only rigged the arm. Naturally the rule of thumb is when it comes to rigging, you make the whole skeleton first and then you make all the controllers for it, and then normally the actual model itself is all bound as one. This is because normally you would have already modelled it and textured it, so then you're ready to rig it. It'll all be combined into one, and then it would all move together when you bound it or bind it. But because we're only demonstrating the arm, we're only showing this section. So I'm just going to rotate that back to 0. So to go back to what I was talking about before, if I highlight this controller, I want to bend the arm. Whoops. That doesn't look natural. That looks weird. No arm in the world moves like that. Not even people that body pop, okay? And the reason why is because when you think of a shoulder joint or an elbow joint, so if we just bring up elbow joint onto Google, so as we can see here, it's a hinge joint, which very much operates like a door. Potentially what you're doing when you move it around like that is you are grabbing this joint and you are yanking it out of its pivot, okay? So this is why it looks weird. So remember, joints, could have just minimized that, rotate. Even when you move them up and down, you are rotating them on the joint, okay? Everything's through balls. So as you can see, it moves correctly. Again, if I translate, it goes all weird. So what we can do is we know that with these particular joints, they're going to be rotating, only rotating. So I'm going to hit 0. Is I'm going to highlight the translate and hold control and just click and drag so we've got these values. And what I'm going to do is right click and I'm going to go lock selected. So what that should do, this will make our cursor grow grey, and we can't actually move it, so that way we don't get any weird funky movements that we shouldn't get. Again, you can see that it's now actually selected the joint, avoid joints, stick to controllers, and we're just going to do the same here. Just going to select the translate, holding control, click and drag for the scale, right click, select lock, and then that way you haven't got an accidental tendency to then translate instead or potentially scale the joints. Sorry about that, the video cut off at the last minute, in case you got a weird little jog. So just to double check, that moves correctly, this moves correctly. You can do it within a variety of axes. So say you've done that and this axis or this particular value is really far out. All you have to do is just highlight 2, just type in 0 and you're good. So I hope you've managed to follow on to this tutorial pretty well. You picked up a couple of things. What I'll do now is I'll show you in the second tutorial how you would go about linking the arm along with the rest of the torso with the model that I have here, so the arm follows along. It'll be a little bit faster because this is an introduction video, so it's intentionally slowed down. The other one will be a little bit more fast paced. And hope to see you next time. Goodbye.